I'm Sarah Fenske, and this is the 314. Every episode, we sit down with St. Louisans who know what makes this place tick. Together, we explore why things are the way they are and how we can make them better. This episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by Classic Air Care. Leland Vittert made his name as a journalist, as a local TV reporter, as the Middle East correspondent for Fox News, and now the host of NewsNation's On Balance with Leland Vittert. But the St. Louis native's new memoir mostly skips war stories in favor of one big love story, the love of a father to a son. Leland's father, Mark Vittert, is known in St. Louis as a founder of the Business Journal and of Donnybrook. But in Leland's book, Mark Vittert is just a devoted dad struggling to help his dad deal with autism, bullying, and more. I think you'll be intrigued by what Leland, nicknamed Lucky, shares about his father's tactics. And Leland also gets into how he was failed by some of St. Louis's top private schools and how his own tough-minded reporting on President Donald Trump led to the end of his career with Fox News. Leland Vittert, welcome.
Oh, Sarah, it's nice to be with you. Good to be back in St. Louis in that sense.
In that sense, yeah. So this is your memoir, but it's also a very public thank you to your father. Did you go into writing your life story knowing that that father-son relationship was going to be like the focus of the book?
Yeah, I don't think anybody's too interested in my memoir. Frankly, I have not that interesting of a life. The part that I think was really important in this was not my story, but what my story means for others and other kids and other families that are having a hard time the same way I did. And by that, I mean that when I was 5 years old, I was at the Ethical Society, which is a little preschool on Clayton Road. And the teachers there told my parents that I needed to be evaluated, which is, of course, the worst thing that any parent can ever hear, next to their child being, injured or something like that. And they take me to a medical building, one of those testing centers where you've got like the cheap linoleum floors and the bad coffee and magazines and stuff. So my parents are sitting there for a couple of hours worried. The woman goes and takes me and evaluates me, right? And among a number of the issues she found is what we now know to be autism. But she came back to my parents. She said, look, we've never seen anything like this. The IQ test that they gave me, for example, had a spread of 70 points. 20 points is a learning disability. I had a 70-point spread. They said, we'd never seen anybody like this. Genius on some levels, mentally retarded on others in the parlance of the day. And she said to my parents, it's very difficult to understand what's going on inside Lucky's head. And this is a psychologist saying they don't understand. So think about what that does to a parent. And my dad felt hopeless. He said, what can we do? Is there anything we can do? And she said, generally not. So I write in Born Lucky about the story, how dad took that as a challenge. Didn't tell anybody that I had been diagnosed with anything. Didn't tell me. Didn't allow any accommodations. In the Born Lucky story, and I write in the book, is the touch point moments, many of them through childhood, middle school, high school, that he worked with me, not only so I didn't have to be defined by a diagnosis, but so that I wouldn't allow a diagnosis to define myself.
So now we know a lot more about autism.
Sure.
When your parents were dealing with this was just this mystery, and people made a lot of mistakes in how they dealt with it. Do you feel like now, if a kid was born and had autism and your parents got that kind of diagnosis, do you think you were better off not understanding? Like, this is kind of why I'm different. Here's how my brain works differently.
I don't know. And I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist. I'm not even a parent, right? I'm writing a parent's book from the kid's perspective. So I think people really have to read the book, and they have to sort of, whether they have a child for parents or a nephew or a niece or grandchild who has difficulties. The book really goes far beyond sort of dealing with autism. It's ADHD, it's anxiety, it's bullying. It's all sort of the difficulties of growing up and being different, how to deal with those and how to give parents hope that they really can make a difference. So I think every parent has to make the best decision they can. I know my dad didn't want to give people a reason to write me off. if that makes any sense.
At that time, I think autism was almost like a scarlet A, right? That people thought like, this means a person can't succeed. And obviously, as your dad proved, that was not the case with you.
Right. But I think also that it also prohibited me from never using it as an excuse. I mean, that still plays out in my life today. In book interviews, you're always supposed to say, as I write in the book. But this is actually a story I'll tell you that's not in the book to sort of give you a sense that I'm still dealing with this because it happened just a couple of weeks ago. So the book was already printed. And I'm playing golf with my father-in-law. And we get done with the round of golf. We're late. I need to get my golf clubs packed in a travel bag. So I'm by the carts near the parking lot. And one sort of, call it symptom, whatever you want, of autism characteristic is that you become very, very focused on a task. One task, that's all you care about. You block everything out. And I was very focused on getting my golf bag packed. So I'm packing it. And the guy who played golf with us came up to me. And he starts trying to talk to me and everything else. And I completely blew him off. I haven't been that rude to somebody in a very long time. And as it was happening, I almost knew I shouldn't be doing it. In fact, I did know I shouldn't be doing it, but I kind of couldn't help myself because I was so focused on getting the golf bag packed and not being late. So I sent him this long text saying, I'm so sorry I was so rude. And, I really just feel terrible. And I'm sorry. I didn't say, and by the way, that's the autism. And because my dad taught me from a very early age, the standard is the standard, right? He knew I wasn't going to be good at school. He knew I was not going to be good at making friends. He knew I wasn't going to be good at athletics, but I could control my character and I could control my work ethic is what he taught. And the Born Lucky book is the story of how he did that.
And he worked really hard with you.
Yep.
Like, give us some examples of what your dad
Sure.
is doing day in, day out. And this is a very successful businessman. I mean, people in St. Louis know your dad, Mark Vittert. He started the Business Journal. He was a founder of Donnybrook. That wasn't the only company he started.
Yeah, sure. There's IBC Root Beer, Vittert Sports. There's a lot of things. What people, I think, didn't understand is when he decided to sell everything, this was a big part of the reason, was that he wanted to spend more time with me. And I think it'd be easy then to look at the book and say, oh, well, this is only for people who can quit their jobs and be full-time parents. That's not the case at all. There's really concrete things that Dad did day in, day out. And I asked him when we were writing this, hey, what would have happened if you'd been working in a factory? And he said, simple, I would have worked the overnight shift.
Wow.
Because he said, I knew that you needed me in the mornings before you went to school. He called it going to battle. And then when you got home.
He was always there for you.
He was always there. I mean, literally every morning and every night. And I'll give you an example. In 7th grade, I'd started at Burroughs, and my parents were hoping this was a new start for me because I'd had to get pulled out of community. Things were very rough there.
This is community school in
community school. And I started at Burroughs in 7th grade. And in the second week of school, the principal called my parents in. They thought it was a normal checkup, but still parents are nervous and you get called into the principal's office. And they're sitting there and the woman's there and the chairs are here or whatever. And the woman starts off by saying to my parents, most people here think your son is really weird. And I do too. So arrow 1, arrow 2 through any parent's heart, which instantly meant, of course, that everything that was happening to me was now my fault. So I write in Born Lucky, that Dad realized this and they just sort of got up and said, okay, and walked out. They didn't say, hey, he has this diagnosis. Hey, he has these issues. Hey, he needs extra time or extra care and attention. Fast forward now to 8th grade and things are getting worse for me, and understandably why. So one day I'm in art class. Think about an art room, whatever. None of us were going to be Picasso. I certainly was not. And I did a painting that my art teacher didn't like or whatever. And the art teacher looked over in front of the whole class and said to me, hey, Vittert, if my dog was as ugly as you, I would shave its ass and make it walk backwards. So for those of listening and not seeing us, I could see Sarah's face sort of kind of convulse in that story. And I walked home that night and came home. My dad was there, as he always was. And he said, what happened today? I said, I was just humiliated, which was not an uncommon thing. By teachers was less common. And he said, okay, what happened? And he went through everything. And like most nights, he be in my room with me or whatever, and we would talk for hours. And I sort of would lay all of my anger and emotion and hurt onto him. So I would do that and, sometimes cry myself to sleep. Sometimes I had homework to do, whatever. And I didn't know this now for 20 years until we were working on the book. He would then walk downstairs. We lived on Price Road. My bedroom was upstairs. He and my mom's was downstairs. And he would walk down to the living room and sit in the dark, and he would start crying. And my mom would come out 1, 2 o'clock in the morning and find him sitting there. Now, the next morning, though, he would take me to school. And the lesson is, not to sort of push the obstacles out of the way for kids, even kids who have troubles, but is to force them through the adversity and to hold their hand while they're doing it.
So reading about this bullying that you experienced at what are considered some of St. Louis's best schools, community school, John S. Burroughs School, this was hard to read. It was hard for me to read as a parent. So I can't even imagine how your dad dealt with this. But it made me angry. Like,
Yeah.
looking back on this, do you feel like there were adults in this situation who not only needed to stop the kids from doing it, but there were adults who were completely out of line here? Were you tempted to name names?
It's a great question. It's actually the first one I've done, I think, 30 interviews so far, and you're the first person to say, were you tempted to name names? And damn straight I was. And trust me, I remember all of them. There was a reason, and it was a conscious decision, which is I really thought, number one, this book is not about settling scores. This book is about saying thank you to my dad and to giving hope to other families. And I cannot tell you, even just as the book has started to roll out, how many people have come up to me and said, thank you for doing this. It tells me that I'm not alone, that my kid isn't alone, that my nephew isn't alone. I have a good friend whose son is dealing with ADHD and bullying, and he's not alone. And so that was the message, right? The easiest thing in the world to do is to write a burn book. Kamala Harris just did it. It doesn't do anything. And number two, it really doesn't make you feel any better to settle the scores, because it's petty and wrong. More importantly, I thought I didn't want to name any names of people who were mean to me, but I really wanted to focus on the names of people who were nice. And I thought that was really an important part of the book, is to make it clear in the future, there's kids who need you. There's kids who need parents like my dad. There's kids who need teachers like Todd Small and Skippy Kiefer and others at Burroughs who stood up for me as much as they could. They need people like my flight instructor. They need people like Bill Shine at Fox News who stood up for me. So that to me was the really wonderful thing that I got to do, was to highlight the good rather than take revenge on the bad.
Do you think maybe there's people in St. Louis who are reading this book, who are paging through this going, oh man, like, I'm looking to see who's in this, or I'm looking to see if I'm in this?
It's not hard. People know when they're doing the wrong thing. Okay. People know when they're being awful. And look, there's a moment in the book, I had such a hard time in St. Louis. I left St. Louis at 18, with no desire really to sort of return, because as you pointed out, what had happened. And there was this moment, and I write about in Born Lucky, where I'm now a foreign correspondent for Fox News. I'm running with the rebels in Libya during the beginning of the Libyan revolution, and the Arab Spring was a big deal. I was on air all the time, over and over and over again. And when I got back one day from the front lines, because we would record during the day on the front lines and then come back to a hotel a few towns behind, so we had defensible space, you'd set up all the satellite equipment and you'd be able to check your email. And in there was an email from the father of a kid who had been really awful to me. And it said how proud all of St. Louis was, and on and on and on. And it was really a nice moment, I think, to sort of feel that sort of full circle.
That didn't anger you, that he was almost taking some credit for, like, oh, St. Louis is proud?
You know what? No problem. No problem.
You were happy for that acknowledgement.
It is a full circle. And I think there's a lesson to that, right? And the reason I put it in the book is there's truth to what my dad always told me when I was in middle school, right? He always said that the characters and the character traits and the qualities and the characteristics that you have that are making you a target and getting you bullied now are going to be the ones that make you successful later in life.
And do you feel that, like, that part of
1,000%,
autism is your superpower?
Yeah, well, that I have a hard time with that, right? Because the characteristics and qualities that I was being bullied for weren't necessarily just because I was or am autistic and therefore it's a superpower. And I think that I understand that line of thinking that's being sort of set out there. That's not how my dad taught a lot of the qualities and characteristics that came from having autism, right? You know, yes, I'm sure there are some things that are positives, but he spent an awful lot of time working on the things that were not positives and adapting me to the world. I think the superpower, and I won't call it a crutch or whatever you want to call it, but the superpower idea says, okay, the world is going to meet you where you're at because you have superpowers, versus saying what my dad did, which is I need to adapt you, Lucky, to the world.
And he did.
And I need to teach you how to interact in the world as the world does, not as you do. And there's a big difference.
And he was very successful with that.
Well, people can decide that for themselves, but yes.
My guest today is Leland Vittert. He's the author of the new memoir, Born Lucky, a dedicated father, a grateful son, and my journey with autism. He's also the anchor of On Balance with Leland Vittert, which airs on NewsNation. Back to that in just a moment. First, a word from our sponsor. Classic Air Care is St. Louis's premier heating, cooling, plumbing, and electrical contractor. With over 4,000 five-star reviews, they're experts in making your life more comfortable. To learn more about extending the life of your HVAC system with Classic Air Care's membership maintenance plans, visit classicaircare.com/maintenance-plan. And now back to our conversation with Leland Vittert, talking about his new memoir, his father, Mark Vittert, also his career in journalism. So journalism is really where you've made your name in the world. This is a job where you have to deal with people all day long. And so for somebody who spends a lot of time describing just how awkward that you feel around people, what made this job appealing to you?
Glutton for punishment, I guess. It's a very fair question. I never really thought about it, right? Because it was my junior year in high school, and my dad and mom were heading up to Northern Michigan from St. Louis. They spent the whole summer out there. And I wanted to stay in St. Louis to row. And then I also had a girl that I was interested in St. Louis. And my dad said, you need a job. And I had remembered that a couple of months before, Charlie Brennan, great St. Louisan and great friend, had said to me, hey, you ever want an internship, kid, give me a call. So I write in Born Lucky about how my internship with Charlie Brennan was my start in journalism. Had Charlie Brennan been a great lawyer or a great doctor or a great something else, I probably would have tried to be that. The difference, I think, about working for Charlie in journalism was it was it fit very well because unlike especially something like medicine that requires like real academic skills, which I didn't have, journalism yields itself to hard work. Lots of things do, but journalism specifically does. So that's one of the things my dad told me I could control, right? You're not going to necessarily be good at school. You're not going to be popular. You're not going to be good at athletics, but you can control how hard you work. And from a young age, and there's a lot of sort of points in Born Lucky of real things Dad did to teach me about how hard work yielded results. So that sort of began at KMOX. And because I worked hard, I was good at it. Therefore, I kind of kept moving along, and that's how it all started.
And so you did that internship at KMOX. You ended up on the local news here before you went.
Yeah, I interned at KTVI, which was a lot of fun, and sort of did that my freshman year of college, and then went off.
And so you went off to Orlando. You went off to Denver. What do you feel like you took from those experiences in the local news trenches?
I think that's a great question, and in Born Lucky, I write about what it's like to be in a Washington newsroom. I think some people who are into politics and cable news and everything, you'll get an inside look at the viper pit of a Washington newsroom, which is pretty similar to a St. Louis middle school, I would say. Maybe even a little bit meaner. But I took, I think, the most important thing from my growing up in St. Louis, small markets, and now to what I do now is a Midwestern sensibility that is, I think, badly needed in the national conversation right now. And I'll get on a soapbox a little bit, but most folks in St. Louis, especially when I was growing up there, Missouri was a swing state. People didn't see things left versus right. It was right versus wrong. And there were things that were more important than politics, which I've sort of maintained thinking most of Washington is not. I think it gives you a unique perspective of how to look at the day's news every day. That's not so dogmatically partisan as it is through the lens of how folks in St. Louis look at it, which is, again, more right versus wrong than left versus right.
Is that what got you in a little trouble at Fox News? I mean, you're there, you're asking some tough questions about Trump's claim.
Well, I don't think it was a little bit of trouble. It's a lot of trouble.
I was trying to be understated here, Leland.
No,
Sure.
I mean, look, it is what it is. There's a saying for it in St. Louis at the private schools. I went to John Burroughs. They used to invite you not to return. So you were not picked out. You were just invited not to return. And I was invited not to return at Fox News. So what you're referring to is the 2020 election comes and goes. And in Born Lucky, I sort of take the readers through the days after the 2020 election inside the Fox newsroom and leading up to a very contentious interview I had with a Trump spokesperson. I was the first Fox anchor to publicly question Trump's claims that he won the election. So it gets into this cat fight, and I went cat fight, but it gets into a very heated discussion with this woman during one of the Stop the Steal rallies on a November weekend. And we now have the emails from Lachlan Murdoch and from others saying, okay, Leland's done. So I was done,
And
punished.
those didn't come out right away. Those came
No,
out
those
as a
were
result
because the
of this
Dominion lawsuit.
litigation. Yeah.
So
Did you feel vindicated when you saw these emails and it was all proven there that they pushed you out?
well, I knew that I had been pushed out because it was very clear. I just didn't have it in writing. Now we do. One takeaway from it is one of the texts that came out was from Tucker Carlson to Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham. And in the text, he's very angry at the interview that I just did. And he says, we spent a lifetime, meaning Tucker and Laura and Sean spent a lifetime building Fox News, and Leland effing Vittert tears it down. So there is now or destroys it. And there is now a desk plaque on my desk in DC that says Leland effing Vittert, Tucker Carlson, and the date, sitting there to remind everybody of what I view journalism as. So I think more importantly than any kind of like journalism thing, in Born Lucky, take you through the two things my dad demanded of me. One was hard work and the other was character. Two things you can control. And the idea that you just tell the truth. It's really simple. And when someone doesn't, I kind of find it a little offensive. And that's what was going on in that interview.
So your dad, at least in the Donnybrook circles and the people I know in St. Louis, he's considered a strong conservative. What did he make of this when sort of the news outlet for conservatives pushes you out in a way that seems very unfair to somebody who cares about the truth?
Well, I would never speak for Dad, number one. Number two, I think the premise of your question probably I wouldn't really agree with. But number three, what I would tell you is, in the course of about a month and a half, I was invited not to leave Fox News. I had ended a very long-term relationship with a woman. So I moved out of my apartment and living out of a backpack and nearly died of COVID in a hospital in DC. So my life was pretty much at rock bottom. I didn't have a drinking problem or anything, but I was at rock bottom. And I was in my parents' guest bedroom in Florida feeling sorry for myself in the early part of February of 2021. And my dad came in, or we were sitting there talking one night, and I was lamenting how sorry I felt for myself and how awful this was. And it was sort of like going right back to that 8th grade bedroom. And he looked at me and he said, you made it through middle school, you can make it through this. And it was a great lesson. I think that full circle moment of that, the adversity that you go through, that tempering process, is your friend. And there's so many kids today who don't have that, that adversity is your friend. Embrace it, love it, take it on, because it's how you can do hard things. And if as a kid, and this was the fateful decision my dad made, had never made me face that kind of adversity, I never would have been able to accomplish the things I've accomplished, because I wouldn't know that I could get through it. So that to me is one of the core lessons here.
So I got to ask you about one last anecdote
Sure.
involving your dad. You're there in the Middle East. You're like
Yep.
reporting in the middle of a conflict
Oh
zone.
boy, here it comes.
And your dad calls you for help getting a reservation at Annie Gunn's.
Yes.
Did you ever think, like, man, we're a little too close here? Like,
No, I mean, look, we're recording this at 3:30. I've talked to my dad already 4 times today, and I'll call him to say goodnight. So we remain best friends. For a long time, he was my only friend. So that's just who we are. The story is, I was in Libya, and we would sort of convoy fairly large security contingent and package we moved with when we were there to and from the front line. So we'd have a hotel a couple of towns back, and then we would drive out early in the morning and drive back a couple of hours each way. And when we were out there early in the morning, it was a little bit safer. You could film on the front lines. You could talk to some of the rebels and on and on and on, and then come back. By that time, it was the morning shows in the U.S., and you'd start doing your live shots for Fox and Friends and the like. So I had a satellite phone. We had a bunch of them, but we had car antennas. So you just sort of sit there with your phone and you try to work or read or whatever while you're driving out there. And my dad would just call incessantly, and to make sure I was okay. Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? And I would, if I don't answer the phone, what the hell are you going to do? Okay, I'm in Libya, and I finally said to him, look, the real problem here is that if you call and I'm trying to answer the phone so you don't get scared, that takes my eye off the ball. And I need to really be focused here. So stop calling. Fine. And eventually he kind of learned the rhythm of the day. He learned when I would call him, because it was normally when we were on the way back from the front lines. So one day we're sitting in the cars, we're driving back. It's a 2-hour drive. And, like, which is in the satellite phones are like these old, like the old big brick cell phones that used to, like, people put on a desk or whatever. So I'm in the backseat of the car, and, hey, Dad, how you doing? He says, fine. He says, hey, you doing okay? I said, no, we're driving back. Everything's good. Fine. He says, hey, I got a favor for you. He says, is there any way you could call Annie Gunn's and see if you could get a reservation for me, like, day after tomorrow, which is a Friday night at 7:30? I said, you want me to call and get you a reservation? He goes, yeah. I said, which seemed completely normal to him. Who it seemed really weird to was the people in the car, right? My security detail and the rest of the staff is sitting and going, you're calling some restaurant for a reservation. So I called the smokehouse and got Vita on the phone. Said, hey, Vita, it's Lucky. Is there any way I can get a reservation for Friday at 7:30 for 4 people? And she screams, Vita, Lucky's alive. He's alive. He's coming. And I said, Vita, I'm in Libya. And she goes, you're in Libya? You're calling me from Libya? I said, yes. And she goes, how are you coming Friday night? And you can hear people in the background going, great, he's alive. He's coming. And, I should preface this by saying Tom Sainer in the book plays this huge role. So he gets on the phone and on and on and on saying, we can't wait to see you on Friday night. I said, no. I said, it's not for me. It's for my dad. He's coming at 7:30. I'm in Libya. And she goes, okay.
she gave him the reservation, right?
She gave him the reservation, which is all really he cared about. So yes, I think, there have been a lot of calls to Annie Gunn's for things. I think I'd still hold the record for the longest distance reservation.
The rest of the world, they're going to be talking about this book. They can talk about your show on NewsNation in St. Louis. That record, you're going to go down in local history.
There you go.
Well, Leland Vittert, thank you for joining us today.
What a pleasure. Thank you.
Leland is the author of Born Lucky, A Dedicated Father, A Grateful Son, and My Journey with Autism. It's out this month from HarperCollins. He's also the host of NewsNation's On Balance with Leland Vittert. I'm Sarah Fenske, and that's the 314 for today. You can find out more in our podcast show notes and at stlmag.com. You can also find me and Ryan every day in your inbox. That's thanks to St. Louis Magazine's fantastic free newsletter, St. Louis Daily. It's a fresh take on St. Louis with insight and original reporting. Sign up at stlmag.com/newsletters. The 314 is a production of St. Louis Magazine with audio editing by Brendan Shanahan. I'm Sarah Fenske, and this is The 314. See you next time.